Okay, hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the Middle East Forum's weekly podcast series, Israel Insider. My name is Anaf Kalam, and I will be moderating today's discussion. We are pleased to be joined today by Ashley Perry, who is the advisor to the Middle East Forum's Israel office, who joins us each week to give us a top overview of the current events going on in Israel. Mr. Perry will speak for 15 minutes, followed by a 15-minute Q&A session. And if you'd like to ask a question, please feel free to use the Q&A box or the chat window. And with that, I will turn the discussion over to Mr. Ashley Perry.
Thank you very much, Achnaf, and good evening from Israel. Tonight we're going to talk about the operation that started this week in earnest to conquer Gaza City and all the potential ramifications of that. And really, the question that needs asking, or that's being asked in Israel, and I'll lay out the two various opinions on it, is conquering Gaza City going to be the tipping point, the breaking point, if you will, to end this war, to break Hamas, to force them into a ceasefire on Israel's terms, or not? And there are two large schools of thought with the security establishment. Some in the political establishment will subscribe to one or the other. The first one is that this is the operation that will finally break Hamas's back. Gaza City, at least parts of it, are like what Dahia, the suburb of Beirut, that was Hezbollah's stronghold, is to Hamas. And really, if you take that, that's its last real stronghold from a strategic military infrastructure point of view, and also symbolic. Gaza City is obviously the capital of the Gaza Strip. It's the administrative capital. It's where Gaza has set up, Hamas have set up their administrative and military center since they brutally took over in 2007. And if you take Gaza City, then pretty much Hamas are defeated largely as a body that rules, has any administrative power, really any military infrastructure. That's not to say there won't be fighters, there won't be pockets of resistance here, there, and everywhere around the Gaza Strip. But as a military infrastructure, it will be broken symbolically, psychologically, and this can be perhaps what will drive Hamas to the negotiating table and to agree to terms more generous to Israel. The other school of thought is that Hamas already understand that at some point it will leave Gaza City, if it hasn't already started to do so. Some are worried that the 400,000 Gazans who have left Gaza City, they may have Hamas embedded in there. Many have gone by car and haven't really been checked coherently. Perhaps even in some, there is worry among some that even some of the hostages have already been removed from Gaza City. They will set up base in some of the refugee camps that they're allowed to create, or some of the refugee camps in the center of the Strip that have yet to be fully conquered, and live to fight another day. And Israel will basically fight pockets of resistance around Gaza that will slow it down, in the hope that Israel will do this for a number of months, and still Hamas will be in pretty much a similar situation. Obviously, if they do lose Gaza City, then they will be in a worse position. But if they are able to regroup elsewhere, they won't be defeated. And that's really the point. At this point in time, Gaza knows it's not, Hamas knows it's not going to win a military fight. Their only hope at this point is to hold out long enough, or to try and pressure Israel into a deal that are more in line with its thinking. Either way, as we do know from comments like those made by Witkoff, even President Trump, and even Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer, that pretty much this war will have to be done by the end of the calendar year. And this really is where everything is going. Originally, the plan to take Gaza was supposed to take planning for a month, and then the actual military operation for a month. But it's clear, A, that the military planning took longer, B, that the residents are not leaving as quickly as Israel would have liked, and C, the military offensive itself probably will take at least a few months if we're being generous, and even then it may not conquer every single last millimeter of Gaza City. But both Israel and Hamas are very cognizant of this time scale. By the end of the year, we're already over halfway into September, so we're talking about 3.5 months. It will not be easy. And so every day of resistance from Hamas, every day that's being slowed by Israel works in their favor. Today, we heard senior IDF officials saying that they are going much slower than they wanted because of the hostages. There was a threat. I think it was last week that Hamas said that it's moving some of the hostages overground into various areas of Gaza City to try and slow the presence or stymie the presence of Israeli soldiers. And that has been admitted by some senior IDF officials. And that is certainly not something that Prime Minister Netanyahu will want. Going back to those two schools of thought, really the first one is that this is the operation that will break Hamas, bring them back to the table, force them into a deal which is very suitable, or at least meet, I don't know if all of Israel's goals, but at least most of them. That is something that Prime Minister Netanyahu believes, something that his right-hand man, Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer believes, and various others. There are people in the security and military establishment that believe the second, that believe that this might not be the battle that ends the war, that Hamas understand that they just have to hold out and live to fight another day, and they're already starting, if not their absolute retreat now, they're starting to think about it and starting to prepare for it. And even conquering Gaza City won't necessarily bring this war to an end. As I said, Prime Minister Netanyahu is banking on it. It's unsure what will happen if we do conquer Gaza and the war's still going on. Hamas haven't come to the table, because at the end of the day, this war will end with some sort of agreement. It won't end with every single Hamas soldier, terrorist being killed. It will end with some sort of agreement. Both sides, clearly, Prime Minister Netanyahu and those around him, in fact, the whole, the government itself, major parts of it, and Hamas, both want an end to this war. But the difference is they both want it on their own conditions. We know Israel's 5 conditions. We've talked about them. Hamas basically have agreed that they will not be in power, but they want some sort of technocratic government. But if they are allowed to remain armed, which is a key part of Israel's demands, that the Gaza Strip be demilitarized or Hamas be de-armed, regardless of who is officially in office, if Hamas still retains the ability to hold on to its weapons, then basically it will be in power, if not in name, at least really behind the scenes, until such time as they decide once again to retake power brutally, militarily, as they did in 2007. So that is why for Israel it's very important that there's some sort of demilitarization, disarmament of Hamas and the Strip, but that's something that Hamas have said that they will never be prepared to do. And if you believe Hamas's bellicose statements, they will never surrender. So again, we go back to that point where it's going to be very, very hard to bridge the two sides to get together to a point which will be, I wouldn't say satisfactory, but to a point where Israel can say that it's won and Hamas can at least walk away with some of its pride intact. That's what the negotiators are hoping for. I don't know how you bridge those gaps. Israel is hoping by military power, by taking Gaza City with such force that it breaks Hamas's will to continue fighting. The tension between the military establishment and the political establishment isn't just about the potential to end the war. It's also prioritizing the goals of the war. As we know, for quite a while, there are many in the military establishment, including Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir, that there is some sort of a deal on the table. Perhaps it's time to take it, or at least improve or at least negotiate some sort of improvement. But at the end of the day, if we're going to go in, to Gaza City, we have to take into account the hostages. And apparently there were some tensions with meetings with the political establishment led by Prime Minister Netanyahu, who basically, according to some in the military establishment, has decided that once and for all, it's decided to prioritize defeating Hamas over rescuing the hostages. And according to various analysts and sources, the chief of staff basically called on the prime minister to announce once and for all either to get rid of the goal of freeing the hostages, or at least be open with the public that it's no longer the priority it used to be. So there is certainly a continuation of these tensions between the military security establishment and the political establishment. We had a lot of other discomfort within the government, we're hearing, not openly, but behind the scenes, that this war, especially now with this latest operation, is taking its toll on Israel's diplomatic status. We know about these threats to recognize a Palestinian state. We hear about these threats to push Israel out of sporting events, out of the Eurovision Song Contest, out of sanctions by the EU, and various other things, even calls from Spain, I think it was today, for Israel to be thrown out of the UN. Now, that's not going to happen anytime soon, but there are some voices in the government with serious discomfort about the way that Israel's political diplomatic situation internationally is going, which kind of led to, I would argue, one of the most shocking statements in quite a while that was made by Prime Minister Netanyahu. Prime Minister Netanyahu, again, that everyone will concede, whether you are a friend or foe, that he is a great communicator. He understands very carefully what he's saying, and everything that goes out is poured over. He mentioned this week during a speech that Israel has to start thinking of itself as something akin to ancient Athens and super Sparta, which basically means a country to a certain extent isolated, more militaristic, and basically has to rely on its own. This caused great consternation around Israel, especially in the markets, which dropped, which plummeted. And we saw the next day Prime Minister Netanyahu had to do a lot of damage control. He either didn't fully understand the nature of the way these comments would be taken, or he understood that perhaps it doesn't play as well into his base that he thought it would. And basically he walked back the comments. The original comments were about general isolation in Israel, isolation around the world. And basically he tried to walk them back by saying, well, it's actually only a military armament isolation. There are countries which are, and in the future even more, will not supply Israel with the necessary arms and military wares to fight battles. So it has to have more of an independent and internal armaments industry. That's something, by the way, which has been a great discussion for decades in Israel, whether Israel should move towards more independent and sovereign defense industry, or it should still be reliant on others like the US, Germany, and others. And Netanyahu, perhaps out of a need for damage control, basically pushed towards that, even though it's something which a lot of people in the defense establishment are realizing after 2 years of war and the threat of not supplying certain hardware for Israel's army, etc., that perhaps Israel needs at this point to take it more seriously and to think how it can be less reliant on the international community. Either way, it is a comment which was jumped upon by all opponents of Netanyahu and even some friends of Netanyahu, that Israel cannot afford to be a Sparta. Israel cannot afford to be completely isolated as it was, as it seems to be moving towards. But it is an understanding, even that Netanyahu understands, that Israel's diplomatic situation is not good. Of course, the Prime Minister tried to deflect and blame, and he actually specifically mentioned two countries. He said Qatar and China are really at the forefront of trying to delegitimize Israel, attack Israel, around the world. He also talked about Western countries and the fact that they seem to be moving against Israel almost purely for domestic reasons because of growing Islamist populations within them, really trying to say, it's nothing to do with anything we've done. These are measures, these are sentiments which would happen anyway, and we just have to care about ourselves at this point. Finally, the fallout from the now what seems almost likely to be the failed Qatar operation against the senior Hamas abroad leadership. What we definitely have heard over the last few days is more and more discomfort, not just from Israel's, I would say, if not necessarily enemies, opponents in the region led by Qatar, but even its friends in the region, Emiratis, to a certain extent, the Saudis, Egyptians, etc., that Israel overreached here. There is this concept in the Middle East of the strong horse, of backing the strong horse. Whoever shows that it's the strong horse in the region will be backed, will be, supported, will basically, everyone wants to come in behind it. But perhaps there is a feeling that Israel has become too much of a strong horse and perhaps needs to be knocked down a little bit. And this is perhaps where some of even Israel's allies and potential allies in the region are today. On the potential of restarting the negotiations, Ron Dermer reportedly is now in London tonight, meeting with Witkoff, the US's negotiator. And apparently there are Qataris in town. As we know, President Trump is in London. So that is perhaps why Witkoff is there and why Dermer's gone to meet with him. But at this point, it doesn't seem like negotiations can get back on track. The first thing that needs to be looked at, and this is apparently what the goal of these meetings is not necessarily to get back towards negotiations, is to bring Qatar back in. There's a feeling in America that not only have Qatar got to be brought back in, but there needs to be some sort of gesture towards Qatar from Israel to make up for what they described as, obscene, heinous, attack on Qatar's sovereignty. And it seems like the Americans are bringing a message, and others, that Israel has to make some sort of a gesture to Qatar at this point to even bring them back to the point where they want to be the negotiators, even before we start talking about the restarting of negotiations with Hamas. So it seems that that's where we are at the moment. We'll have to see if Israel does do this gesture, if it agrees to it, because if not, it seems like Qatar will not be pushing for negotiations to restart. And perhaps that leads us to a place where it'll be more and more difficult, even if Israel does put pressure on Hamas, that some serious negotiations could take place. But these things can change pretty quickly, and it all depends on the pressure, going back to my first point, on the pressure that Israel is putting on Hamas in Gaza. And depending on which school of thought that you subscribe to, whether Gaza City is the Dahia of Hamas, whether this is the final do or die, Hamas are coming to the fight and this is it for them, or whether you subscribe to the idea that Hamas are going to leave Gaza City, are going to try and fight another day, are going to try and hold off Israel as much as possible until 2026, when it seems like the Trump administration will lose patience and force Israel into some sort of a deal. So that's where we appear to be as of now. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you very much. I will begin with a question from Carrie Hillebrand, who asks, to what extent is Israel cooperating or aiding Gazan clans, in addition to Abu Shabab, as alternatives to Hamas? Are they having any success in pushing back Hamas and exerting a degree of control?
I mean, they've been doing this for well over a year, trying to reach out to local clans or groups within Gaza. They've had success in the southern Rafah area with the Al-Shabaab clan. There is talk that they're having a certain amount of success in Gaza, but at the moment it doesn't seem to be working to the point that Hamas are in any way dissuaded from this. Hamas are very much still in power in areas of Gaza City. They are stopping and preventing a lot of those hundreds of thousands remaining in Gaza from leaving Gaza. They're still very much in control. So if there is a plan, and I'm sure there is, and I'm sure there are discussions with groups and clans that, are opponents to Hamas, at this point in time, it's not having the greatest of success, but perhaps it will grow as Israel encroaches more and more territory. Perhaps there are clans who are saying, well, we want to hold on to a certain amount of territory, and we're going to have to fight for this, and we're going to have to fight Hamas for this. So at the moment, it's probably in its infancy in Gaza City, but perhaps as Israel takes more and more of the city militarily, perhaps that will grow.
All right, thank you. Next question comes from Eric Selkov, who asks, what does a win in Gaza City look like, and do you think it will end the war?
Well, taking Gaza City is basically conquering it to the point where the IDF holds and occupies, I wouldn't say every single corner, every single inch, but pretty much controls Gaza City. Again, this is not normative warfare. This is not the warfare for the last few hundred years. This is urban warfare against a terrorist entity, a guerrilla movement, even to a certain extent at this point. Some say that they're waiting for Israel, the IDF, to go further in, and then they'll pop out from their tunnels, try and kidnap a soldier. Apparently that's something the IDF is extremely worried about tonight, that they could kidnap some soldiers as they move further and further into Gaza City. But I don't know which school of thought I subscribe to. We have been told many times over the last 2 years that if this particular operation, whether it was Rafah or others, this will be the one that will end the war. This is the final fight against Hamas. We have been told that before, and each time it simply wasn't true. So I'm a little bit skeptical personally about it. I hope it's true. I hope that that really this does put as much pressure on Hamas as possible, and that they will. I don't see any question of them surrendering in the old-fashioned sort of sense of the word, but understanding that they are defeated in as much as they have to agree to a negotiated deal very much towards Israel's terms. Not necessarily every single one, but towards Israel's terms. And I've talked previously about how some of the terms disarmament can be, and sending some of the Hamas leaders into exile, there could be symbolic. Israel is not going to collect every single weapon from Hamas, and certainly not every single weapon in the Gaza Strip. So the idea of a completely demilitarized Gaza Strip just simply isn't going to happen. So the question is exactly what that looks like, and if it's something that Hamas can live with, maybe to fight another day. Maybe the leaders are understanding that this is it, they're defeated, so at least they should leave with their lives, perhaps to fight another day, or perhaps just to live a life of luxury in Doha like some of the Hamas abroad leaders do. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what that looks like.
Thank you. Shmuel asks, what comes next? That is, assuming the Israelis win militarily, what government will follow that will be at peace with Israel?
Well, those are two different things. What comes next is very hard to understand, because there are a lot of discussions on it, and it's very unfair to say that the Israeli government haven't thought about the day after. They have. They've been in discussions with various entities around the world, whether it's the US or whether it's regional partners. It has certainly become more difficult as of late, but it would need an end of war. It would need an end of Hamas. No Arab powers are going to send troops into a strip while Hamas are still there. They certainly don't want that. And there is a feeling that, Israel, you broke it, you smashed the place up, you have to fix it yourself. So it's very hard to see what exactly the day after plan, and to say that it will be peace with Israel. Again, it all depends how that looks. Will it be a technocratic government? Will it be the Palestinian Authority? Something the Israeli government have been at pains to say that they do not accept, which makes it more difficult, even though it's seen as understandable from an Israeli perspective with all the problems and challenges the PA itself have with corruption, with its own hatred of Israel, etc., etc. So it's really unclear what the day after will look like, and even if we do have some sort of negotiated surrender, I don't think we'll see something that looks like surrender in the classical sense, but something where Hamas will agree to terms that are amenable towards Israel. It's hard to see that. So I would say, even harder to see what will be the day after at this point, at least. Maybe in the next few weeks and few months, we'll get a better idea. But at this point in time, it's very, very hard to see what that could look like.
All right. Thank you. Mark Wigder would like to ask, what does the polling in Israel say about where the people of Israel are on this operation?
Like, I think we've discussed this before, but as in all polling in Israel, it depends how the questions are asked, who's asking the questions. If you ask a news channel which is very supportive of Netanyahu, would be very supportive of the operation. If you if it's one of the media that's antagonistic towards this government, then it will be the opposite way. I think it's relatively evenly split, and it all depends how the question is asked. If it's, do you want to release the hostages, you'll get a very high percentage of those who do. If you then ask, should we free the hostages, which will mean an end of war, Hamas remaining in power, then it's a lot lower. There hasn't been too much explanation exactly how this operation will end the war. There are the slogans that this operation will end the war, but it hasn't really been explained. And let's not forget that there are tens of thousands of Israeli civilians who have been called up to the reserves who are now fighting. And again, even for them, it's not clear. They've heard this before. This is going to be the last time you're called up. They've been told on a few occasions in the past, because this is the operation that's going to end the war. And there was high levels of motivation. Each time you state that again and again, the motivation will go down a little bit. It's very hard to know what the support is for this operation. Yes, I would say, if you just asked a simple question, do you support the defeat of Hamas? Large majority would come out in favor. But what is the cost? And exactly, how are you going to do it? And is this going to lead to the defeat of Hamas? Do people believe that? These are all questions that at the moment play into all the different variables. So it's very, very hard to understand. But pretty much on all these issues, the country is largely split. If you're with this particular government, you're going to be more supportive. If you're against, then you're going to be less supportive. And while the opposition parties appear to have a majority in polls, so the country probably is, let's just say, more antagonistic towards the government. There are elements who are voting, or will say that they're voting for the opposition, who are right wing, whether it's supporters of Bennett, supporters of Lieberman, or others. So it's very hard at the moment. It's very, very complex, and really does change from day to day, and changes on the variables and the way you answer it. So that's a very long-winded way of saying it's very difficult to tell what the levels of support for this operation are. But I would say it's, as far as I can read, it's not necessarily straight down the middle, but not a million miles away either.
All right, many thanks. We have unfortunately reached the end of our podcast. I want to thank you again for taking the time to update us this week.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Of course. Now, for our viewers and listeners, please be on the lookout in your email inboxes for your weekly podcast offerings email over the weekend. As always, I thank you all for your viewership and your participation, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thanks.